So not only are synonyms and near synonyms in Arabic repeated in ways that are unusual in English, but it also fairly common in Arabic for a hypernomy to be followed by its hyponymy in a way that appears to an English speaker to result in a semantic anomaly. Okay? Consider the following example, which taken from حفنة التراب by أنيس منصور. وهم لا يتحدثون إلى أحد من الناس ولكنهم يداعبون الباعة والمتجولين. Now, this sentence can be translated fairly literally as they did not talk to anyone, but they joked with the sailors and the poor men. Here, الباعة, the sailors, is a hypernomy of متجولون, poor men. Literally, traveling people, but normally used to describe people who sell goods for a poro or hand cart. All poro men are sailors, but not all sailors are poro men. Okay? In case such as this, the meaning of the first word is a particular context has to be taken as excluding that of the second word. In this context, therefore, the الباعة has to be interpreted as a meaning not sailor in general, but that group of sailor who are not متجولين, okay, the poor men. Accordingly, باعة here means the non-poor men, sailors, and could be translated idiomatically as something like shopkeepers, or giving an overall idiomatic translation along the lines, like, for example, they don't talk to anyone, but they joke with the shopkeepers and the poor men. Okay? See the following example, which is سياسة تصدير الثورة أوقعت إيران في العديد من المشاكل والأزمات. Translation, or the fair literal translation of this sentence can be that the policy of exporting the revolution led Iran into a series of problems and crises. Okay? Now, the word مشاكل here is a hypernomy of الأزمات, or the second word, الأزمات. It is not possible to have a crisis that is not a problem, but it's possible to have a problem that is not crisis. In other words, the crises are problems, but not all problems are crises. Here, the best solution from a translation point of view might be to go for the more dramatic crisis and to abandon the notion مشاكل, or the word مشاكل. Okay? So the translation can be that the policy of exporting the revolution led Iran into a series of crises. Okay? Another way, given that semantic repetition in Arabic is often used for emphasis, one might use the emphatic adjective such as a grave or series in combination with a crisis. So like that the policy of exporting the revolution led Iran into a series of grave crises. Okay? Let's take another example. الحرب مع العراق التي كلفت البلاد أكثر من 2,000,000 قتيل ومئات الآلاف من الجرحى والمعاقين. Okay? So the fairly literal translation of this, the war with Iraq, which cost more than 2 million dead and hundreds of thousands of wounded and disabled. The word jarha, wounded, is a virtually hypernomy of معاقين. Although it's in fact possible for someone to be disabled from birth, the disabled people referred to here in the example to those who have become disabled by virtue of the wounded they received in the war in Iraq. Okay, a more idiomatic translation might take into account by rearranging the information or paraphrase along the lines, like the war in Iraq, which cost more than 2 million deaths and hundreds of thousands of disabled and other wounded. Okay. If it were felt that the writer's major intention was to stress the seriousness of the wounds here in the example by the use of the form of semantic repetition, one might, in English translation and English, sacrifice a certain amount of accuracy for a greater degree of idiomaticness and go for translation like this one. The war with Iraq, which cost more than 2 million dead and hundreds of thousands of seriously wounded. Okay, now see this example, which is a religious text taken from Quran chapter 2 verses 238. حافظوا على الصلاة أو عفوا حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى. So if we translate it literally, it will be keep your prayers and the middle prayer. Okay, but if we want to move to more idiomatic translation, as ا.علي in 1938 translated, say, guard strictly your habit of prayers, especially the middle prayers. Now here the Salat al-Wusta is a part or hyponymy of Salah. Okay, so appearing in the plural form Salawat, so a literal translation can be prayers and the middle prayers, which seems to suggest that the middle prayers is somehow not a prayer. So in ا.علي translation, prayers, especially the middle prayers, avoid this with introduction of especially, okay, with the word especially. Okay, previous examples which I discussed have been cases in which the hyperonymy occurs first. However, it's possible to find cases in which the hyponymy comes first. See this example. هوية إيران السياسية الجديدة وطبيعة علاقتها مع جيرانها ودول العالم. Now the word جيران came before دول العالم. In the previous examples, حافظوا على الصلوات والصلاة الوسطى. So the hyponymy came before the hyperonymy. So this can be translated literally like the identity of Iran and the nature of its relation with its neighbors and the states of the world. In this context, Jiran, or the word Jiran, is effectively a hyponymy, and the word دول العالم is the hyperonymy. That's to say, what is meant by Jiran here, neighbors, is in this context, is the neighboring states like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait and Emirates. So, and because of all neighboring states are states of the world, but not vice versa, this looks like a hyperonymy relation. In fact, دول العالم should be interpreted here as a referring to the other non-neighboring states only. And an adequate idiomatic translation can be achieved by adding the word other. Okay, see this, see the translation. So the identity of Iran and the nature of its relation with its neighbors and other states of the world. Okay, an alternative might be to eliminate the word states altogether on the basis that it's clear from the context that what is going to talk about are states, giving an idiomatic translation along the following lines, like the identity of Iran and the nature of its relation with its neighbors and the rest of the world. Okay, now let's move to the associative repetition part. Okay, now it's let's say it's a part of repetition in Arabic, third form of semantic repetition that is frequently found in Arabic but does not normally occur in English. Okay, it involves at least two or more elements, one of which is a basic element and the other or others which are associated with the elements. For example, like the word ship and crew of ship. Crew of ship is not type of ship. Okay, So in this example, this is not a hypernomy relationship, nor it's a part of a ship, as a ship mast, for example. So we have several examples that involve associative relation in Arabic. Now let's see the word, the sentence. استطاع, here is it, استطاع علماء العرب والمسلمين الجمع بين قطبي المعرفة وهما الفلسفة والعلم، فاستعملوا الامتحان أي التجربة النظرية، وعرفوا المنهج التجريبي، منهج تجريبي التجربة النظرية ومزاياه وقوانينه، بينما كان الإغريق أصحاب المنهج التجريدي. Okay, so this sentences can be translated like Muslim Arab scholar were able to combine the two poles of knowledge, philosophy and science. They used testing, example, or another word, experimentation and scientific theorizing. They knew the experimental method and its features and rules, while the Greeks were the master of the abstract method. But if we move to translate it idiomatically, we would say the Muslim Arab scholars were able to combine the two poles of knowledge, philosophy and science. They used testing, experimentation and scientific theorizing, while the Greeks had been the masters of the abstract method. The Muslim understood the rules and the features of the experimental method. So in this example, مزايا, okay, المنهج التدريبي, the feature of the experimental method, and قوانين المنهج التجريبي, the rules of experimental method, are not meronyms of منهج التجريبي. Okay, they are not part of the experimental method. However, they are features very closely associated with it. Okay, a similar situation can be found in the example فالنجوم ومجموعاتها وأفلاكها وأبعادها والشمس وحركاتها والقمر وأطواره ومنازل السماء وما حوت وتعاقب الليل والنهار والشروق والغروب، كل ذلك يرى فيه المؤمن الخاشع دلائل صدق وشواهد حق على وجود الخالق وقدرته العظيمة وعلمه الذي لا يخفى عليه شيء في السماوات أو في الأرض أو فيما بينهما. So as you can see here, the literal translation can be the stars and their groups, orbit and distances, the sun and its movements, the moon and its phases and mentions, the sky and what it contained, the succession of night and day, and the rising and setting of the sun were all matters in which the humble believers saw the proof of diversity and the evidence of the truth of the existence of the Creator and His overwhelming power and knowledge, for whom nothing is hidden in the heavens or earth, or what is between them. Okay? If we see the word here مجموعاتها, the first relevant element, مجموعات النجوم, the group of stars, وأفلاكها, the orbit of the stars, أبعادها, the distance, dimension of the star, stand in an associative relation to the stars themselves. Okay? They are features associated with the stars. Now, a more idiomatic translation of نجوم ومجموعاتها وأفلاكها وأبعادها would be the orbits and the position of the stars and the constellation. Okay? This element, this associative repetition, it does this by taking the two first elements, النجوم ومجموعاتها, and re-expressing them as a simple coordinate nouns, which are the stars and the constellation, rather than as the more literal the star and their constellation. Okay, the idiomatic target text then takes الأفلاك والأبعاد وأفلاكها وأبعادها, the last two elements of the source text associative triplet مجموعاتها وأفلاكها وأبعادها, and links this as a coordinate phrase, the orbit and position, to which the phrase the star and constellation is subordinate via the proposition of, giving the complete target text phrase, the orbit and the position of the stars. Okay. Other part of this extract would be discussed in the section 7.3, which is not required from us. So we'll stop here to discuss the next part.